to give you a little bit of an idea, when we talk about pesticide complaints, we do look at a lot of different things. The main area is in ag plant. This last fiscal year, we ended up with 172 consumer-generated complaints. Majority of those were in ag plant. In years past, that average complaints typically would see in ag plant about 50% would be aerial applications and about 50% would be from ground applications. The last year's kind of what we've seen is a change to that, and it's mainly because of the over-the-crop chemicals dealing with your dicamba 2,4-D applications that can only be put out by ground. So this year what we've seen is about 20% aerial and about 80% from ground applications. But that's not all we look at. We also see complaints from right-of-way applications, from termite treatments, and from general pest, which is going to be treating for insects inside your homes or restaurants, et cetera. So that's kind of where we're going to be going out looking at different types of complaints and what we're seeing. Typically, the question that I'm going to get is, should I file a complaint or not? People do not like filing against their neighbors. They want to get along with their neighbors, but they think their neighbor has done something to them, and they're trying to figure out, should I really file a complaint or not? I would usually, go ahead and recommend, trying to work something out with your neighbors if you can, but if not, maybe you do need to file a complaint. But something I do point out to them that they probably need to know is that prior to filing any action against an applicator for damages, you'll need to file a complaint with the department. Now, this complaint filing needs to be within 90 days or 25% of harvest. Basically, the reason for this is if you wait and file your complaint later, we're not going to be able to see anything. So you do need to file your complaint in a timely manner. The next portion of this, a lot of words on here, but basically, if you are a commercial applicator, you do have some rights also if somebody files a complaint against you. You can go out and do your own investigation. And that's basically what this is saying, is that you have a right to go out, take your own samples, do your own investigation into this complaint. The next part, it says any person failing to comply with the paragraph, which means you didn't file a complaint with the department, that you may be barred from filing action for damages later on. So this could become an issue if you try to later go out, seek civil action, whether it's against your neighbor or the commercial applicator. You may not be able to pursue that if you haven't already filed a complaint with the department. To give you an idea, this is a complaint that we received a couple weeks ago. Actually, it was over Thanksgiving. This farmer had looked at 2,4-D damage on his cotton all summer long, and he fretted about it, should he file a complaint or not. He waited, and finally at harvest time, he confronted his neighbor, and his neighbor said, "No, not me, I didn't do it." So we're looking at going out there now, looking at this. What are we seeing? Well, we see some patches, areas that do look like a reduced yield, but we can't tell. Is this 2,4-D effects on there? Is it some type of environmental issue? Was there a disease, insect? What's going on out there? So we can't tell. Plus, it's past the 90 days, so there's not a whole lot that we can do, for this guy, other than instruct him if this happens again next year, file in a more timely manner so we can go out there and take a look at it. So how do you file a complaint? If somebody approaches you, wants to know, or says, hey, I really need to file a complaint, how do I go about it? You can direct them to the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture's webpage, which you have here. And over here under the quick links, there is an area that says pesticide complaints. And by selecting it, it would take you to a complaint page that will have all of my contact information there. It talks a little bit about what to expect from a pesticide complaint, how to obtain records from previous complaints that you may have filed, and there's a number of quick links to that. There's copies of the law, there's information areas to get to OSU fact sheets or other information you may need to know. Right in the center of that, it says pesticide complaint form. If you click on it, it will take you to an online form that you can fill out. This can even be done from your smartphone. Just get to this link right here and you can fill out a complaint. It's going to be asking for your contact information, what you're going to, who you are, how to get a hold of you, an area that you're going to identify where the complaint is, what you're complaining about, and if you know who you're complaining about, all that information would be going into this form. The form then comes in the form of an email to me, and I would be assigning it to an inspector. The first thing that we're going to be doing is sending out a letter to the person filing the complaint saying, hey, we received your complaint. It's also going to give them a complaint number, the name of the inspector that's going to be coming out there, kind of what to expect in the form of an investigation, and it'll again have my contact information if they have any questions or want to know the status of their complaint later on, what's going on. All that information will be in that letter that will be sent to them. If they filed it online and provided us with an email address, those will be emailed to them. Otherwise, they'll just go out in the regular mail. If a company is identified, so say, they say, I know it was this co-op down the road that did the spraying. At that point, we'll be sending out a letter to you. This letter, some of you may have seen, it's a 2-page letter. It gives a list of questions concerning applications that you may have made. So you make the application, we're wanting your records. This is also an opportunity for you to let us know, is there anything else concerning this that you're aware of that would help us in our investigation? Are you aware of any other applications in the area that we need to know of when we go out there to do our inspection? Majority of the complaints, though, do come in unknown. A lot of times, especially if they're going to be complaining against their neighbor, they may just go ahead and write down there it's unknown. Let us try to figure it out when we get out there to do our investigation. That way they can tell their neighbor, well, I didn't know I was filing against you. I didn't know, where it was coming from. Or a lot of times they don't know. And so we'll go out and that's what we're going to be trying to determine in our investigation. So what do we see once we get out there and start looking at what they're talking about? When we approach the complainant, we're going to be saying, what are your concerns? What are we looking at? Sometimes we look at it and we see, okay, it really looks more like some type of a pH or some type of fertility issue. We may be taking some soil samples, send it off to the OSU fertility lab and seeing what's going on. They may be looking at some leaf spots and they say, oh, well, I know the neighbor sprayed paraquat and so that's what's going on. We look at it and say, no, it looks more like a disease to us. We'll be sending it off to OSU Plant Diagnostic Lab, getting those results back. They're also real good about putting together a fact sheet if that's what's going on, and we can provide that to the complainant and let them know here's what's going on, here's a disease, and here's what you may need to do about it. And letting them know it's not herbicide related, it's something else. We also get some strange ones. This one here is one of my favorite ones. A couple years ago, this lady called in. She was convinced she was going to have tomatoes throughout the winter, and in November her tomato plants died. And she was convinced that her neighbor must have sprayed some type of herbicide, and that's why her tomatoes died in November. So we had to explain to her that that is normal for tomatoes to die in November. So we do get some unusual ones. However, I will say majority of the time when people do say, I think I have herbicide effects out there, they are right. There are some herbicide effects. So what are we looking at? When we go out there, we're going to be looking at symptomology. Knowing what types of herbicides were used out there, what types of symptoms that we're seeing will help us identify where that chemical may have come from. Also, we're going to be looking at direction and patterns. So if we see one side of a tree that's been, is yellowing and the other side is still green, that'll give us an idea of what direction we may need to look. At the same time, we're going to be looking at the field. Are the effects uniform throughout the entire field? Or are they consistent on one side of the field and kind of feather in from one direction? That'll give us some idea. Or are we talking about they start at the edge of the field, they're exactly one swath width wide, they continue along the length of the field at one swath width, may make a 90-degree angle, continue down the width of it for a while before slowly fading out. That will give us an idea of what may be going on out there. As such, we're going to be asking for information. We're going to be talking to the property owner. What types of pesticides have been sprayed on this field or on your yard, on your garden, so that we know if we take samples, we know, and we find some chemical we don't know where it came from, did they do it themselves? We're also, once we kind of figure out an area that we're talking about, if we've identified a direction, we're going to be spreading out about 2 miles and looking for any potential sources. And so in that, we may identify other areas that may have been sprayed. Other crops, right-of-ways, have they been sprayed in the area? Are there pastures? What has been sprayed? And once we've identified those, then comes the hard part. We're going to have to try to figure out who owns this property, who farms the property, and then who may have sprayed that property. So sometimes that does take some time. I've had some people who call me and say, hey, I'm upset. We didn't find out and you didn't send us request of records until the crop's already harvested. We're not able to go out there and do our investigation. Well, if it came in unknown, we go out there and we say, hey, this field has been sprayed. That's the most likely source where it came from. Now we've got to, go to the county assessors, find out who actually owns the property, send them a letter. They come back, well, we lease it out to Farmer Jones. We try to get a hold of Farmer Jones, and then Farmer Jones finally says, oh, I hired this guy down here to do my spraying. So sometimes that does take a while to get that tracked down, who actually made the application. And then, so if you're one of the commercial applicators out there and you get a letter saying, what did you do? That doesn't necessarily mean somebody is complaining against you. That's just you made an application in the area. We're going to be looking at everything that happened in that area and trying to eliminate as many of those sources as we can in that process. So the information that we're going to be trying to collect out there is the application records from all the applications that were done. We're going to be collecting all of the product labels for all the different pesticides so that we can view those labels. We're going to be looking at weather data, trying to figure out what was the wind speed, the direction at the time of the application. We're going to be looking at maps so we can kind of get a relationship as to, you know, where the complainant's property is, where the different fields are, what's in between, what are we looking at, and then samples. We may be, like I said, we may be sending samples off to get a fertility test. We may be sending samples off to get a plant diagnostic test to see if it's some type of disease issue. And we'll also look at chemical residues. And so we'll be taking all of this information and putting it together. So what are we going to be looking for? Basically, with the Department of Agriculture, we're going to be looking to see, is there a violation of the Oklahoma Combined Pesticide Law? We are not going to be out there to assess how much damages were done. We're not going to be going out there and, you know, afterwards compensating a farmer for the loss. Now, that information is in that initial letter that the people are sent, explaining to them that those aren't things that we're going to be looking for. But it is information that, you know, we do get calls consistently, you know, well, you know, you're out here to build me a case. No, that's not what we're there for. Now, our cases and information do get subpoenaed. Our inspectors do get subpoenaed and brought into civil action, or insurance companies get copies of our reports and use it to help base some of their determination. So as we go out there, you know, we let them know our sole purpose is to see, is there a violation of the Oklahoma Combined Pesticide Law? And, you know, if they need copies of our reports, they can request it through an open records request, get a copy of it, and go from there. So what are the laws that we're looking at? If we're talking about pesticide drift, we're basically talking about two different laws. First one is a person has used a pesticide in a manner inconsistent with its labeling, which means I'm going to be looking at those application records, looking at the labels of the products that you used, reading all of the precautionary language that's on that label, looking at the mixing rates, and trying to determine, was this pesticide used according to that label? If it wasn't, then that would be a violation. It would be addressed to the applicator. The other area is a little bit more difficult to define, and that is a person has operated in a negligent manner, thereby causing a pesticide to drift off target. Now, if you get two attorneys in a room trying to argue what does negligence mean, you'll come up with at least three different answers. So that's what we're basically looking at. Kind of the rule that I look at is, what would a prudent applicator do? You know, you're out there, you're spraying this crop for this guy, you know that there's a sensitive crop right next to it. Did you leave a buffer? Was the winds blowing away from that area? Did you use drift retardant agents to reduce the amount, you know, any potential for drift? What actions did you take as a prudent applicator to try to prevent the chemical from moving off target? If you're operating kind of in that marginal area, the label says do not spray in wind speed over 10 miles per hour, but boy, you're pushing it. It's, you know, maybe 8 or 9 miles per hour at the time, and it's blowing towards there, and you didn't leave very much of a buffer. Then we may be looking at this instance here, where it's more of a negligent assessment. Maybe it's not necessarily a label violation, but operated in a negligent manner, causing a drift to occur. So what am I going to be looking at? Once I've reviewed all of the information, looked at all the labels, and tried to determine, are we seeing any violations? I'll be either saying no violations were found, at which point a letter will be going out saying the case is closed. We did not find any violations in our investigation. Or there'll be a letter of warning sent to the applicator or the farmer did his own spraying and saying, we found that there was a violation and here's what we think that you did wrong. If you get one of those letters, this is your second opportunity to provide information. You can let me know you don't think my findings are correct and why. Was there more information that you think was there that I failed to look at or was not aware of? You can point that information out and we will take a look at it, and that will go into the case file. And that's why I want that information in writing. Don't just call me over the phone and say, oh, I think you're wrong. I want it in writing, and here's why. All of the letters of warning go to our general counsel. I'm not the one that decides whether there's going to be a fine assessed or what action is taken against the applicator. That's going to be done by the attorneys. And so by having them look at it, if you put something in writing, it goes into the file. They have that to review also. So they will not be only looking at the information I've put together. They'll be looking at any information that you have provided while they're making their assessment. So they're going to be looking at it. They're going to be deciding this is a closed case. They're just going to let it close with a letter of warning. That's the only action taken. Think of it as a warning ticket. Maybe you were speeding down the highway, the cop pulled you over, he gave you a warning ticket. Okay, go on down the road, don't do that again. Or they'll issue a notice of violation. If you get this, it's going to be about a 6-page document. Says across the top, it's a legal-looking document, says notice of violation, and it explains what the violation was, what happened, what your rights are, what you can do. With that, basically there's two main options that you have. One is on the back of it will be a stipulation page where the attorneys are saying they feel that you need to pay a fine of a certain amount. You can either go ahead and just pay the fine, sign the document, send it in a check into the department, and that ends it. Or you can request a hearing. There will be a date and time on there that is set that you can get your attorney, you can meet with the department and set a date for an actual trial. That's going to be before an administrative law judge. Both sides present their arguments and the judge will make a ruling. The other thing you can do is just call the attorneys, discuss the case with them, and see if there's something that, some mitigating circumstances that you have, and see if there's some other arrangements. Sometimes if you know that there is a civil case pending, maybe you don't want to just necessarily admit to guilt and go on, but there is language that the attorneys can put into this agreement where it basically says, we're settling this because it's going to be too cost effective to try to argue it, but we don't think we did it, and that it's not something that would be brought up in a court of law if it does go to a civil matter. So there is some language that the attorneys can address those issues with. But all of these cases, the final action is taken by the Board of Agriculture. So Once the attorneys have looked at it, if you pay by stipulation or a judge has made his ruling, that's not necessarily the final action. Once it goes before the board may look at it. They may look at the stipulated amount and say, we disagree with it. We think it should be higher. We think it should be lower, and tell us to go back and rediscuss it. Or same thing with the hearing. You know, they may look at it and say, we think we need to change some of these recommendations, and that's what they would have to go on. So the Board of Agriculture makes the final decisions on any fine, et cetera. That's basically, what I do as far as complaints, how complaints are started and generated. Usually people contacting me, or they find the site online and go ahead and file a complaint, and then we proceed through this process. Does anyone have any questions? These new products, the new dicambas are restricted now, and so they would have to only be used by certified applicators. Our current administration wants the new technology out there and in the hands of the farmers. So we're not looking at trying to restrict any of it. We want them to be able to apply it correctly and go on. Is there some brown box stuff going on out there? Possibly. We did not see any this last year that we could definitively say, yeah, that was a brown box application, what was going on. Majority of them were commercial applicators applying it. Some were farmers that applied it themselves, and but the records and information they provided did show that they had some of the new chemicals. So whether they were still using some brown box off the side, I don't know. We could not prove that. Our inspectors, we do a lot of our own on-the-job training, where they're going out with a seasoned supervisor and looking at the symptomology and identifying it. One of the other things that we do is send our inspectors to Arkansas. Arkansas, through their Arkansas State University, they do have a symptomology class that they put on for all of the Arkansas inspectors, and they allow other people from the region to come over and go through that class. In there, they will plant the different crops that they are expecting to see, and they will make applications at either 1/10 or 100th of the label rate. So you're actually seeing drift type applications out there and seeing what those symptomologies are going to look like. That's a very good class that they do have available that we try to get our inspectors to. As well as any other EPA course that is available. We try to send our inspectors to those, where they're also going to be looking at symptomology, drift type scenarios, drift investigation, and report writing. They also get into how to testify in court, because a lot of our cases do end up in court. In fact, this presentation I give quite often, but usually it is preceded by, raise your right hand, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth? And then ask, okay, so what do you guys do as far as complaint investigations? Yes. We have assessed fines to individuals. In fact, one of the highest fines that I can think of in the ag plant area did go to an individual farmer. In his case, he did not use a backflow device, and chemical was back siphoned into a rural water district that affected a daycare and a number of homes. So he did receive a pretty hefty fine for that misapplication. Right now, with the new dicamba, we are looking at one farmer that did not go through the dicamba training, and there was a lot of drifts that kind of appeared to be associated with his applications. So we are kind of looking at that pretty seriously, and of course that's going to have to go through the attorneys to make that final decision. But yes, we do often look at it. To date, no. And in fact, commercial applicators being fined for this new technology, I'd say no also. But this one that I was just talking about is one that we are probably going to be looking at, and it was a private applicator. It will be annually, and so Dr. Bauman, I'm sure, would be putting together something for this next year. I haven't seen any dates yet, but there will be, coming out with some training. There is some new information and going out on the new labels. And so that information will be addressed in the new training for 2019. And actually the way EPA laws read, they are approving this label for 2 years. So it's 2019 growing season and 2020 growing season. However, they've also talked about annual training. So even though you have dicamba on your card right now, you'll have to get it for 2019 and probably again in 2020. With the private applicators and the training that they have, that is going on this year, that we are, they will need to recertify this year. As far as what's in that training or in that test, I have not taken it myself. I do not know if that's been updated. Now, I would tell you that EPA, in their certification and training update, they are wanting to see private applicators have a closed book test and or look at continuing education. So that won't catch this year, but when they recertify in 5 years, we will probably have something in place where they will need to either take a closed book test, the same as all the certified applicators in this room, or attend meetings such as this to obtain continuing education units. We're still going to be working through that, so the details on that we don't know right now, but that is something that's going to be in the works. There's actually two issues that I see with that. One is with restricted use pesticides, they do need to keep some records. However, that is a USDA, not an EPA requirement, and it's not something that has really kind of continued. We have discussed putting something into our statute where we currently require records to be kept for commercial, non-commercial applicators to include private applicators in that. Now, where we also run into problems is that is for restricted use pesticides. So if you're talking about somebody's going to be using a non-restricted product, whether that's one of your 2,4-D normal, non-over-the-crop products, it's not restricted. So they don't have to keep records. That does present an issue with us when we're trying to find out who sprayed what, when did you spray it, how did you spray it, what's going on. We will take a sample from that field, even though the farmer says, well, I don't know what or when I sprayed it. and see if we find, what residue we find and does it match what may be on the complainant's field. But it does come into issues when we're trying to look at the records of the application. Sometimes the records help them, sometimes not. But that is an issue that we do run into from time to time.